Welcome to Biology Made Easy. In this lesson, we are discussing the adaptations of the cell membrane. Now, you have a cell here, and this is the membrane, and this one is the cell surface membrane because you have extracellular fluid here. But if you have a mitochondrion here, it's the same membrane structure. We said the only difference with the cell surface membranes is the glycoproteins and glycolipids. This is the structure of a cell membrane. And in this lesson, we are only picking the phospholipids. You have phospholipids, you have protein, you have cholesterol. That is the major components of a cell membrane. But we want to look at the adaptations of the phospholipid bilayer. And I have the phospholipid bilayer drawn simply here. It has a phosphate, and the phosphate is hydrophilic. It has fatty acid chains. The fatty acid chains are hydrophobic. We have the inner surface also here. So that's the bilayer. Now, what are the adaptations of this bilayer for getting the proteins and the cholesterol? Now, the phospholipids, these which I've drawn here, there are great numbers of them, plenty, and they are not arranged haphazardly at all. They are arranged one after the other like this in a kind of a layer. And the reason it does that, and its feature is that then it bounds the cytoplasm. Look at it. The cell membrane then bounds the cytoplasm into a unit. And if it's an organelle, it's the same thing. If this is mitochondrion, the membrane bounds the contents of the organelle, right? So that is one of its adaptations. Great numbers and the arrangements. 2. The phospholipid bilayer, this is it, the phospholipids, they form the primary structure that holds the other components. So it's the primary structure, so it's plenty, supports the other components. And the other components, they are membrane proteins and cholesterol. Good. That is one feature. Something must be there to hold the others. And that is the phospholipid bilayer. The third adaptive feature I want to look at is that the outer surface of the membrane is hydrophilic, water attracting. So this membrane, this here, the cell surface membrane, the outer surface here of the membrane is water attracting, hydrophilic. If it's a membrane of an organelle, the organelle is lying in the cytoplasm, the outer surface of the membrane is hydrophilic, just like the cytoplasm is also hydrophilic, aqueous, water attracting. So it means that the aqueous or hydrophilic nature of the membrane agrees with the fluid around it, so that substances can easily dissolve in it and move across. The cell membrane, the inner surface is also hydrophilic. So the inner surface here is also hydrophilic, agrees with the cytoplasm so that interactions will go on, substances can easily dissolve in. And if the inner surface here of the organelle is hydrophilic. Hydrophilic allows substances to dissolve in so that it can interact. The cell surface membrane can interact with the outer surface and with the cytoplasm, and substances dissolve in, reactions can go on neatly. Well, the interior of the phosphobilipid layer here, the interior of the phosphobilipid here is hydrophobic because it's fatty acid chains. Hydrophobic repels water. So the interior of the membrane repels water. So water can flow through from one part to another part, but the water will not be able to stay inside the membrane. So water will not flood the membrane, soaking the membrane, because the inner here is hydrophobic, and so membrane flooded or soaked. Even though water can pass through, it doesn't stay. Tiny bits of water molecules can seep through, but it will not stay. Then 6, the fatty acids are not closely packed because there are bends in the fatty acid chains, because double bonds are in the fatty acids. Check from the lesson on function and structure of cell membrane. So these fatty acids are not fully packed because the fatty acid chains have bent because of double bonds. So the phospholipid bilayer is fluid, flexible, right? So it's not tightly packed, it's fluid, and then the phospholipids move sideways. There's sideways or lateral movements because each of these phospholipids can also turn 360 on its axis. And so, because the fatty acid chains are not tightly packed and there's movements of the phospholipids, sideways movements, it makes the whole membrane fluid, flexible, and so membrane can expand, not crack or break. Because it's fluid and flexible, its flexibility, sideways movements of the phospholipids, you can imagine, affects the permeability of the layer. And so if it shifts sideways small here, the hole in there can increase slightly, or shift there, increase. So the whole lateral movements also affects the permeability. Cholesterol tries to keep the permeability, but we're not talking about cholesterol. Please check in the lesson on functions of cholesterol. Then the seventh adaptive feature is that the molecules that form the bilayer, phosphate, fatty acids, that's the molecules that form the layer. And the arrangement of the molecules following each other like this. And not only that, the phosphates are up, and the inside fatty acids. So up here, down here are hydrophilic, water attracting up, and then hydrophobic inside. This causes the layer to be selectively or semi-permeable. The other structures also do that, but the phospholipid bilayer alone is also selectively permeable because a polar substance ion or molecule can dissolve in the upper layer here because it's hydrophilic. It can pass through, but as soon as it gets here being hydrophobic, it can go. So the substances that go through are specific tiny polar or ion that can flow through specific substances because of the nature of the molecules, how they are arranged, and the characteristics. So that makes it selectively permeable, even though the proteins also do it. We'll come to that. Then lastly, the cell membrane, whether it's a cell surface membrane or is a membrane around an organelle, the membrane is not fixed. The membrane can increase in size or can decrease in size. And one of the processes that we can use to show that the membrane can increase in size or decrease in size is the process called bulk transport. Bulk transport, two processes form bulk transport, and the two processes are endocytosis and exocytosis. So bulk transport is the transport of large quantities of a material into the cell, and when it's into the cell, it's endocytosis, or transport of large quantities of material out of the cell, and when it's out of the cell is exocytosis. And the transport, it entails enfoldings of the cell membrane. So part of the cell membrane is going to be used to transport substances. So if you have exocytosis, substances are going to be transported out, and part of the membrane will be affected. And so these substances are transported out, and while the process goes on, part of this membrane will come and join this, and then the substances will be put out. So finally, this membrane, which was in the cell, the cell secretes a lot of substances from the Golgi apparatus, etc. So if there's a vesicle inside the cell, it has very good substances like hormones or enzymes it wants to take out. so that the hormones will go to other cells. The hormones are in a vesicle, and this vesicle comes to attach on this membrane, and when it attaches on it, the membrane of the vesicle becomes part of the membrane of the cell membrane. So finally, the cell membrane will be this with part of this joint to it. So you see, the cell membrane therefore increases in size by exocytosis. So the cell membrane can increase in size, it can also decrease in size by endocytosis. You have these large substances going into the cell, and these large substances will take part of this membrane and come in and form a membrane around these substances. So part of the membrane will go off. This is endocytosis, and we have phagocytosis when it's transporting large substances, solid, and you have pinocytosis when it's transporting liquid. We have to look at this process on its own, but all we are saying is that the membrane length does not remain the same. Well, this is what we have for today. We have been able to work out about 8 adaptive features of the phospholipid bilayer alone. In our next lesson, we'll look at adaptive features of the membrane proteins. Well, so we'll meet in that lesson. Goodbye. Give us your thumbs. If you haven't subscribed already, please kindly do. Bye-bye.